to the organizers for putting this all together. It's really exciting to be able to join from the US. So I'm an artist by trade, new media and sculpture, and I teach in a creative technologies program, mostly creative code and new media art theory. So I'm coming from a slightly different perspective than I think a lot of the talks here today, which I find really exciting. Um, Over the past 3 to 4 years, I've been working on taking my own practice in more sustainable directions. So that means like producing artwork that is more ecologically conscious and sustainable while not actually making the work about sustainability or low carbon methods. So I'm mostly interested in transgender studies and technologies. So I'm not really making work about sustainability, but I want to make the work sustainably. So what I'm presenting today is how I've begun to try to think about taking that work into the classroom in order to broaden the impact of the work, right? Because the scope of any individual artist is, dare I say, more limited than, say, figuring out the many problems of servers and data centers and the like, which we've been talking about today. So digital artistic production is closely linked to carbon emissions, and at the same time, art is a fundamental part of human experience. We can no more stop making art than we can stop making music or poetry or scientific discoveries. Yet as a society, we must all be working to reduce our carbon emissions. So it's critical that as we train the next generation of creative technologists and digital artists, we do so while centering emissions and our changing climate. There are many examples of low carbon efforts within the arts, from solar internet projects like Solar Protocol to theories like permacomputing aesthetics to movements like the demo scene in Web Revival and others. The problem is not that digital artists have yet to engage with computing within limits, but rather that these approaches remain on the very edges of creative technological practice and see next to no adoption within creative production pedagogies. So artists, and perhaps especially new media artists, contribute to public perception and adoption of new technologies through their use of emerging technologies such as augmented and virtual reality, generative image systems, and high-resolution displays in the production of their work. In this way, art and media production are mechanisms within the larger machine of unsustainable computational consumption. As such, it's critical for artists to develop, share, and promote new and more sustainable methods of engaging with technology, especially within the context of higher education. So how might we teach technical and the technical and conceptual skills needed for new media artists to acknowledge our climate context in their work? And additionally, how can arts education play a role in resisting the aestheticization of digital maximalism? So there are three main challenges that I've found in talking about this work. First, it's that climate change touches all aspects of artistic labor, from ideation to production to dissemination. This ubiquity makes it difficult to address in a classroom setting or really in one's practice at all, especially as the work of an artist is largely independent, right? We don't necessarily get to work in teams where different teams can be responsible for different aspects of the work. We end up kind of being the producer, the promoter, and everything of our work all at once. Also, while examples exist, as stated at the start, and as will be covered in a moment, many approaches to low carbon creative computing are technologically complex, obviously. This complexity can make introducing these topics to beginners very challenging, especially in the context that is outside of computer science, right? So teaching creative technologies is different than teaching computer science in that students get maybe 1 to 2 classes of coding, and otherwise their technical exposure to these things is rather limited. And then three, there is a lack of artworks which engage low carbon methods while not being about low carbon methods. In other words, there is a need for showing how to do creative work sustainably when the work itself isn't about sustainability. To address these challenges, educators must identify actionable areas of improvement within the technologies they're teaching and craft projects and hands-on experiences and weave low-carbon thinking into the aesthetic, theoretical, and technical content of their courses. Realizing that I'm going a lot slower than when I practice, so I'll probably speed it up here. So while the scope of artist work does not usually come at a scale that would see large gains in overall emissions reductions, it is nonetheless important for artists to engage these technologies with the environment in mind. Doing so allows for technological limits to beneficially inform aesthetic choices, the artist to challenge the preconceived notions of technological standards and norms, the technological substrate of the work to be understood as highly material rather than in the cloud or immaterial, and for artists to help enfold sustainable practices into their imaginaries. In each of the methods proposed, it's important to consider the location of the work. Location meaning both the specific site in which the project is taking place, that is the lesson or the project, and the sites that it may be exhibited in. Taking this context into consideration allows the identification of potential local partners such as e-waste facilities, renewable energy sites, community groups, etc., an understanding of categories such as renewable or sustainable and what they might mean in different contexts, right? What is optimal renewable energy in Blacksburg, Virginia, where I'm at, is going to be very different from renewable energy in, say, California. The exhibition of the work to be considered in its overall ecological impact and lifespan. So very briefly, three methods that I've been considering in this work are compute reuse as media archaeology. So an exploration of reusing obsolete or outmoded hardware, e-waste, can simultaneously extend the life of compute equipment, thinking here about embodied emissions, while also enabling artists to gesture to the social context for which the equipment was initially made. Classroom engagement with this method might include a site visit to a local e-waste facility and a project wherein students explore the history of and develop a new work for a specific piece of old hardware. This could either be done via emulation of the hardware or acquisition of the original hardware, depending on the class scope and prior experience. Method 2, sustainable web development and material specificity, an exploration of how designing websites with a low carbon mindset on the back end can be brought to front end development in the form of low resolution / jithered images, limited color palettes, patterns, etc., in order to highlight these choices to end users / viewers. In the classroom, this might look like facilitating a hands-on experience with network hardware and challenging students to work within visual and technical limits in the production, that is, coding and deployment of a website. A very arbitrary or simple way that I have done this in the past is to challenge students to make a portfolio website where the entire website, including assets, is less than 5 megabytes. Like how do you make work, visual work, show up on a website under such constraints? The final method here is frugal computing. So thinking here about the always-on approach to contemporary art gallery display settings, and the classroom implementation of this could involve students redesigning existing exhibition space to be responsive to energy availability and when designing future projects for the redesigned space. So that was very quick, but with all these methods in mind, I hope to offer ways for those of us teaching creative technologies to do so in more sustainable ways and to begin to integrate low carbon methods into all aspects of our curriculum. Again, while the scope of individual artistic works is normally rather limited, artists drive interest in adoption of technologies and must expand their role in helping imagine and enact new ways of thinking and making within the arts and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the speaker? Yes, Adrian.
Thank you for your talk. I'm really interested in how you teach sustainability and its complexity and sort of how I like this idea of working within constraints. I watched a thing recently where they decided to got historians in to talk about the evolution of technology and explain how it got to where we are. Do you see a similar role for artists to get involved in other disciplines, or do they just have to become experienced in art, or is your focus just on the creation process itself?
I'll paraphrase. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it just that he enjoyed your talk very much, and he wants to know whether there is a role for artists similar to the role of technology historians to educate people on the issues.
Yeah, I really do think so. I think one thing that I try to teach my students is that to not just be techno optimist or techno solutionist, right? And that to be critical users of these technologies that you can both be enamored by and fluent with a technology while also being critical of it. So yeah, I agree. I think that the arts and humanities have a really big role to play in kind of speaking back to technological progress, so to speak, and to think about the sort of more human dimensions of this work.
Right. Any other questions? I have one, which is, how do your students like it?
It's interesting. I would say that the students are really excited to learn about it. The technical part does become a leap, especially from the art side of things. Their coding background is really pretty weak. So when we get into the nuts and bolts, it becomes more of a challenge. But I do find that especially undergraduate level students right now are really hungry for more conversation about these issues in the classroom because they're not hearing about it as much as they should, at least here in the States.
Okay.